Good evening. Tonight we're going to be talking about Gnostic books for beginners. It is something that we get a lot of questions on from our viewers and as well as our listeners. How are you, Bishop Peterson?
I'm doing well. How are you, Bishop Ken?
Very good. Well, let's dive right into this. I think we're going to throw out there probably the number one Gnostic book for beginners or everyone, but a little bit drum roll. I'm going to have to suggest an Al-Kamadi library, edited by Robinson. It is a great translation, and I think it is, quote unquote, the industry standard.
Yeah, it is a good one. I tend to like Bentley Layton's translation, but that may just be a matter of personal preference. But either way, I think definitely working with the Gnostic scriptures and reading them is an excellent place to start.
Yeah, and it's probably just from my own experience. I mean, when people have approached me with, what do I need to study? Where should I start? I usually try to kind of gear them towards, going towards Gnostic scripture. I may add other books into the mix as our discussions start to progress, but I definitely think it's a good way to start, especially for someone who only has a background in the Bible and in, the normal canonical text.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I do think that people should pick up a copy of their, of the standard canonical Bible as well, and read that. And maybe in the podcast, I can throw some tips that I've given to people over the years for alternative ways of reading the canonical scriptures. But I think that it's also important to have a familiarity with both texts, particularly the Gospels. And I know that, for example, many people believe that the Pauline epistles can also be very, very useful for understanding from a Gnostic perspective. As a matter of fact, another book that's been recommended is The Gnostic Paul by Elaine Pagels.
Absolutely.
Which is a Gnostic reading of the Pauline epistles. And I think it's a really excellent way, a really excellent approach. And even if you're not if you're not convinced, it offers the opportunity to reconsider reconsider Paul's writings. Many people will make him out to be the enemy of the Gnostics, or at least Gnostic thought or Gnostic ways of thinking. And Elaine Pagels takes a slightly different approach. So I would definitely recommend that book as well.
Well, I think we've discussed it several times on the show. I think, recently, I forget who our guest was at that time, but with the Gnostic Paul, for me, the first time I read it, it really did help to kind of open my eyes, because I never had really considered Paul much of a Gnostic writer. Probably being brought up in fundamental Christianity, my eyes were probably shut to the idea of Paul giving any form of Gnosis, and it really made me kind of reconsider even the way that I read the rest of the Bible.
Yep.
So for that point alone, I would tell people, get a copy of the Gnostic Paul. It is, again, it's got to be on our top 10 list.
Sure.
Modern books. Got to give a shout out to Father Jordan with Living Gnosticism.
Yes, Monsignor Jordan Stratford has been a guest on the show and on the podcast, and he wrote his book, Living Gnosticism, in which he takes a modern day approach to Gnosticism. And I know a lot of people, it's been very influential.
Yes, it has been. I think that not only has it helped to, get a greater dialogue with a lot of people, with Gnosticism in probably in this last decade since it's been released, but I think has opened up lots of doors, lots of communication to lots of people who weren't even looking at the Gnostic path. So, I kind of applaud him for that. Really good book.
Yeah. Now, another one that I would recommend, which kind of bridges both the Nag Hammadi library as well as modern thought, would be the Gnostic Book of Hours by June Singer. And it's an absolutely lovely book. It is designed as a spiritual discipline, so you can read portions of the Gnostic scriptures along with June Singer's commentary at certain times of the day. But it's a great way to get familiar with different parts of the Nag Hammadi library and some of the Gnostic Gospels, as well as Thunder Perfect Mind, and some of the riches from that particular library. I would say that June Singer is a Jungian, so there's definitely a Jungian slant, and the way she writes is as a Jungian. But I think it's a wonderful introduction to both the spiritual practice of observing the hours, but also the different Gnostic scriptures, as well as different perspectives that one can take when doing this kind of work.
Well, it's interesting that you brought that up, because that was definitely on my list as well. And to be honest, that's usually the number 2 book I recommend.
You know, I know that Father Monsignor Jordan Stratford has mentioned that it's one that he recommends a lot as well.
And for me, the reason that it's usually within my top 2, if it's not, the first book I recommend, it's usually at least the second book I recommend, because it also gets the student not to just read. It gets them into practice. If you take it for what it is, a book of hours, and you take it as, these are going to be my practices. I'm going to start a regimen of daily prayer and use these as your prayer. That doesn't mean that down the road one doesn't grow and start using other scriptures and other writings, but use this as one's kind of first source. It gets one in the process of doing. And I think we've discussed many times in the show that being Gnostic is more than kind of mental masturbation. That it's more than just being book smart. It's more than just reading and learning. It is about that transformative experience, and this gets one into a regular practice where one is open for Gnosis and for that transformative experience. So again, cannot say enough good things, cannot recommend that book enough to all of our listeners and viewers.
And it is readily accessible on Amazon at very reasonable prices too. So there's no excuse not to get it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The Gnostics, history, tradition, and scriptures, influences. Highly recommended by many within the Gnostic community for giving kind of a very complete picture of the history of the Gnostics.
Yeah, and it's by Andrew Philip Smith, and it's very highly regarded for those who are interested in, I think, more of the classic Gnosticism. Now, I have found recently a really wonderful book called Priests, Gnostics, and Magicians, The European Roots of Esoteric Independent Catholicism by Siobhan Houston.
I've never seen that book.
Well, now you do.
Okay.
And it was actually her doctoral dissertation, or based on her doctoral dissertation, and it is basically a history of the French Gnostic Church, or the Continental Gnostic Church, and how it segued in with the independent Catholic movement and that sort of thing. And it's a very interesting, very readable little book. And I strongly recommend that folks check it out, particularly if they want to understand the history of this branch that you and I are part of the Continental French esoteric tradition of Gnosticism. It's very easy to read. It is available on Amazon. It is also part of the Amazon Matchbook program, which is if you buy a print copy of a book, if the author or the publisher agrees, you can get a copy of it in Kindle form, either for free or at a very low cost.
Oh, that's excellent.
So it is part of that program. So if you that's one, it may be an incentive to buy it, but it is available in Kindle format as well as in paperback. I strongly recommend it. It's very interesting. Some colorful characters.
I've never seen that book, so I'm pretty interested in reading it. I'll mention to our viewers, Father's Day is coming up. I am a father. I am a bishop. Therefore, I'm always going to be a father.
And you are always a bishop.
No, that sounds really, really interesting. Sometimes there's just way too many books that we need to be reading or should be reading or want to be reading. I know that I have given away lots of my library. I've donated them. But it seems like every time I give more away, I get more. And there's always something to be reading.
There always is. So.
Well, you had mentioned, the Holy Scriptures of the Bible, but I'm going to be very specific and say the Gospel of John.
Okay.
Again, if we are looking at Gnostic, and especially coming from the traditions, that we come from, those that came from the French Gnostic traditions, and I would say even if we look kind of historically at many of the groups who considered themselves Gnostic, the Gospel of John was always considered the most Gnostic of the Gospels. So I think it is a good starting point for those who are reading the New Testament to be really starting with the Gospel of John.
Okay. It is lovely. It is very different from the Synoptics.
Mm-hmm.
I remember taking a course in it in seminary. It's challenging, but that's what we're here for. That's what we're doing this for, is to be challenged. So absolutely. Also, speaking of practices, we cannot, of course, afford to neglect the book written by our own beloved executive producer, Sanctuary of the Sacred Flame, by Father Tony Silvia. Now, I will say that this was written by Father Silvia, specifically for his own Apostolic Joanite Church, and some of it may or may not be appropriate for other types of Gnostics. But I think he's got some really great ideas. He's got some rituals, and it's really, really a very helpful book. And it's incredibly accessible. You can buy it on Amazon. He's also got it up on Scribd in PDF format for a free download. So there's no excuse, again, not to be reading Father Silvia's book. And again, it's about modern Gnosticism, but I think it'll have some great ideas for people who are really looking to step up their practice. And I think it can be a nice companion along with June Singer's Gnostic Book of Hours as well.
Yeah, I agree with you. And anything that we can get our viewers into practice instead of just reading, I think is going to be a good thing. And when we finish this and we get into the podcast, maybe Father Tony will join us and he can give us some insights, being the author, on how he thinks is probably best to go with the approach of using his book for modern practice, and some of the insights that he can give on his own experiences from the things he put down in the book.
Absolutely. Father Tony is also an excellent pastor, so he's somebody who knows how to. He really works with people on the ground, so has a lot of insight for us.
Absolutely. Tons of other books that we can get into. Some of it, kind of hesitant. Do we get into now? Do we get into the podcast? There are books that, if our viewers listen to us on the podcast, we're going to be discussing, I think, not only books of Gnosticism, but books on various occult subjects, esoteric, that I think gets people into the idea not only of thought, but also as well as practice, because we're all about the practice. But I'm going to throw one of those out there right away, and that is going to be the Sacramentary of the Rose Croix, Prayers and Formulas, and these are the prayers and formulas that were used by the French Gnostic traditions, by Robert and Elaine. Originally, the book was only in French. Several years ago, it was translated into English by Bishop Ronald Capello. Mm-hmm. There are some unauthorized versions out there. I'm sure if someone was to do a Google search, they can find an unauthorized version. I would highly recommend, if someone wants this book, it's not very easily accessible. Maybe we can put in the show notes, but if they were to contact one of our former guests, Dominic Carlucci, who is an associate of Bishop Capello, they can get their hands on a printed version. And the way that the Sacramentary works, I would highly recommend a printed version, because these are prayers and formulas. It gives everything from blessings of water, blessings of house. Some of these may apply more to those kind of in holy orders. Mm-hmm. But again, I think for many of our listeners, kind of, even seeing some of the practices that modern Gnostics take is going to be a very interesting read, even from a point of view of history.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we do hope you'll be joining us for Talk Gnosis After Dark, and we'll have that podcast up for everybody, and we'll be going more into some of our favorite books as well as some ideas for effectively reading books on spiritual subjects. And we also would ask you in the comments section right now, let us know, do you have any of these books? What do you think of them? And which books are your favorite? And they don't have to be on our list by any stretch of the imagination. If you think we've missed something or you want to recommend something, we'd absolutely love to hear about it.
Absolutely.
And I would like to remind everybody that if you enjoy the show and you find it helpful, you can help support us at patreon.com. Patreon is a service that allows you to pledge a small amount of money per video or podcast, can be as little as a few cents, and you can cap your contributions each month. So if you can only afford $5 a month, you can set the cap so you're not going to get a surprise at the end of the month. And every penny goes to support the development of this and other Gnostic NYC programs and helps disseminate news and information about Gnosticism and other esoteric topics. We very much appreciate everybody who's offered their support so far. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yes. And a little bit of news. Next week is the Apostolic Joanite Church's conclave in Chicago. It is not too late to register or to arrange to come to at least some of our sessions. It's going to be a fabulous time. I'm going to be presenting on Friday morning on divination as a spiritual practice, and I'm hoping to see some of our viewers there. So I'm looking forward to it, and I hope if any of you are interested in attending, go to www.jonite.org and shoot off an email, and arrangements can be made for you to come for all or part of the conclave.
Yeah, I think for those who are able to attend, it's always one of those yearly events that I would recommend to anyone, regardless of their spiritual direction. If they're remotely interested in Gnosticism, go to conclave. Go to conclave. Again, I'm going to ask our viewers, to send us feedback. You can find us on Facebook as well as here on this YouTube channel. Make sure you drop us an email at talkgnosis@gnosticnyc.com if you have any comments, anything regarding the shows that you're watching, or even suggestions for future shows. Even topics like this, many of these we get from our viewers. Hey, we want to know what you guys like to read, so we do a show for you. So we really appreciate your feedback. Coming up on Future Talk Gnosis, we got some pretty exciting things coming up.
We do. We've got Brother David Atkins, who is an independent Gnostic living in the Bible Belt, who basically attends a mainstream church and gets a lot of support, actually, surprising amount of support. So it's going to be a really interesting show for people who are kind of on their own and don't have the benefit of a local community. I think it's just kind of going to be a great show.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting.
Absolutely. And then we've also got Brother Matthew Backus, who's going to be talking about his involvement in esoteric initiatory traditions and about the responsibilities of being an initiate. So it's going to be another great show.
Fantastic. Looking forward to both of those.
Absolutely. All right. And as always, this has been a production of the Gnostic NYC Network. If you enjoyed this show, please share it with your friends, click the like button, and subscribe to our channel. Opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily represent the views of Gnostic NYC or any other organization. No animals were harmed during the production of this show. And for more Talk Gnosis, tune in every Wednesday for new episodes. Thanks so much for joining us. Good night.
Good night, everyone.